turn to Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. Morning, Minister and gentlemen. The ORR has reported a 23% rise in passenger rail service complaints in the year ending March 23. Why do you think that is, and what's the department doing with the TOCs to improve customer experience and reliability across the rail network?
So, we've been clear that the passenger performance is not acceptable. The delays, the cancellations have been very challenging. With that, we look at Network Rail's performance. We also look at the train operators' performance as well. And we also look to industrial action, which of course has had a massive impact for the period you mentioned and actually continuing. What we have seen, so if we looked at the ORR's latest review for the month sort of January into February, then we saw the cancellations reduce from down to 3.6%. They had actually been on a steady increase, I'm sorry to say, from summer going all the way up to a high going from December to January, where they were just, I think, around about 5.5%. So that's welcome. That's one of the lowest for a year. So that is a better rate. What we also have to address is the challenging weather that we've experienced over winter. I mention that because we've had, I think, 10 named storms. It's been absolutely horrendous for the railway. And actually, I try and be positive, and actually I look at how well the railway and the staff have actually done in those circumstances, because it has been absolutely horrendous with the wind and the rain. But it is a challenge for passengers. I totally recognise that over the year. Your service, for example, in Chiltern, has got a lot busier, which is successful. But we now have issues in terms of rolling stock age, etc. as well. So our challenge is trying to find that investment at the same time as we justify putting almost £45 billion of taxpayers' subsidy into rail services, because we're only 80% of our finances, and that's £1,500 for every household. So trying to balance the investment with the taxpayers' need to keep their own household bills down is a constant challenge, and I think that also therefore has an impact on the performance of the railway.
Thank you for that. Funny you should mention Chiltern. It's like you'd preempted where I was going to go with that afterwards. So yes, customers of Chiltern in particular, and I should preface this by my focus will be on Chiltern and other colleagues, and then come in later around Avanti and so on. Chiltern used to be the gold standard. Now the mere glance at the customers of Chiltern Railways Twitter account paints a horrid picture of daily stories of people not even being able to get on trains, of massive overcrowding, looking like the tube at rush hour rather than a mainline rail service. Part of that is they've got the oldest rolling stock of any operator on the network. It's constantly in and out of the repair shops, and that's why they end up having to run shorter trains. There are other trains literally sitting, going a little bit musty in sidings that Chiltern could operate. How can we speed up the process of getting those in the short term before Chiltern has full fleet renewal as their 2030 plan sets out, those trains that other operators are not using onto Chiltern?
So I thought this may come up, Mr. Smith, because you are a champion of the railways and particularly Chiltern and your constituents. I'll ask Conrad to talk a bit about the rolling stock options. I have myself been pushing for the 5 units that have come off Trans-Pennine Express, and I've been working with Conrad and his team to try and get those put on. I'll leave Conrad to talk about what the sort of longer-term future is in terms of new rolling stock. I know that we hear from those passengers who are impacted, and rightly so. What I would say is that Chiltern's performance level is just short of 90% in terms of their delivery versus their benchmark of 87%. So they are performing well, but there are challenges with regards to that rolling stock. Conrad, do you want to touch on the rolling stock?
Maybe just add a couple of points. So we saw a procurement notice, a contract notice released to the Roscoe market, so the rolling stock market, in December 23, with a view to seeking replacement of those trains. We're taking that through our governance at the moment within the department, and our expectation is that we should see a contract award to introduce new trains into service next year. So very much trying to move that quickly. We're conscious that the timelines are quite pressing here because the Chiltern trains actually go off. Some of them go off lease next March. So we're very much working with them on that. In the meantime, we're also looking at what we can do around service levels to relieve overcrowding and those sorts of things. Working with Chiltern, particularly at peak times in the midweek.
So I'm grateful for that, but to get the customer experience back up to where Chiltern customers, particularly on the main line, but the Aylesbury branch is equally affected, back to where they expect it to be, back to a rush hour train leaving Hadnam and Tame Parkway or Princes Risborough, to pick two random stations that may be in my constituency, where people are being left on the platform. They're physically unable to get on the train. That's not good performance, and given the sort of lead times of driver training on new fleet coming in, you've talked about a governance process. What is that? Is it entirely within the DfT? Does it involve Treasury sign-off? How long will that governance process take so that my constituents and other Chiltern users that are paying, times 50 quid return in order to stand with their face pressed into somebody else's armpit, if they can get on the train at all, can actually have a service that gets them up to Birmingham or down to London in a pleasant and comfortable way for their money?
So the real issue here is not our governance process, which will need to be goes through DfT ministers, but also the Treasury. But it's actually the pace of the procurement process and making sure that we work with Chiltern and the Roscoes that they move that as quickly as possible. At that point, I think our governance won't be the thing that drives the timelines here. It will be going through a proper procurement process as quickly as we can. And as I said, very much a recognition that time is against us here. In the meantime, the question I think is what can be done in some cases to mitigate that crowding, because clearly it's not good for anyone. And that's where, as I say, we are working with Chiltern to look at whether there are any additional services they can introduce in some areas to help relieve that crowding. It will be a mitigation, it won't be a solution, but we hope that will.
Well, Chiltern do have multiple requests in. There's one about bringing their bigger diesel loco sets back into service, two sets of which currently aren't. But I want to come back to this point that yes, they've got long-term fleet renewal plans, they've got a big 2030 plan, that's fantastic, that's great, but it doesn't solve the February 2024 crisis. And I don't use the word crisis lightly, it really is that bad on some Chiltern routes. When there are, as I mentioned earlier, either the TPE surplus sets, and I believe there are others out there that aren't ex-TPE, yes, I understand the need for governance, I understand the need for proper procurement, but this isn't long-term, this is short-term. Trains that are sitting in England, unused right now, that could just be transferred to Chiltern or other operators that are struggling. Surely there is a way to cut down the process for that short-term, just get some more trains on the tracks and operating as soon as humanly possible, as soon as the drivers and the crews can be trained to use them.
So we're very much trying to move this procurement forward as quickly as we can. It has to be in compliance with the utility contracts regulation, which does fix some of the timescales. But as I say, we're very much aiming to do this not with a view to 2030. This is with a view to 2025. I still accept, as you've made clear, that doesn't solve the problem this week, next month, and the solutions in that space, to the extent they're available, will be in terms of looking at the timetable and the services that are being run, and if there's anything we can do in June 2024.
Yeah, I'm committed to finding a solution to this. We want to encourage more people to use the railways where passenger numbers are growing. We want to encourage that. So I am actively looking at what the options are across the railway to be able to provide more resilience to Chiltern. I can give you that assurance. I will keep you posted on that front, and if I find difficulties, I'll of course let you know.
I appreciate that. Just to my point about who the players are within government on this, is the Treasury a blocker? So if the DfT signs something off are we then in a doom loop with the Treasury, or is that a straightforward process?
I wouldn't call it a doom loop. But there is a process. It does. If we are looking at anything that alters costs, then that means that the Treasury needs to be involved in that conversation as well. But we work very positively with the Treasury in terms of getting that sign off, and not just at the end of the process, but as we go along as well. I'll ensure that you are aware if there are any bumps in the road in terms of internal sign off. I can assure you of that.
Thank you.
Sarah, turn to you next.
Minister, what assessment has been made